I love mixing up the guests every week. You get somebody notable from the 80s picking their favourite songs on Virgin Radio 80s Plus over to Phil Harding.
My 80s playlist.
Virgin Radio 80s Plus.
Phil Harding, hello.
Hello, Steve. How are you?
Really good, thank you. Welcome to Virgin Radio and Virgin Radio 80s Plus. It's a thrill to meet you. I've seen your name on the back of 12-inch records for nigh on like 35, 40 years. You're the man behind a lot of the records that a lot of people have bought, you know, over the years. So you're, how do I refer to you? Remixer, producer?
Well, Pete Waterman named us, and I was the first one, Mixmaster. Phil Mixmaster Harding. And a lot of the credits are that. And then along came Pete Hammond and Dave Ford, also mixmasters, and Tony King. So those of us that were concentrating on the mix side of things, that's the kind of tag that we got from Pete Waterman, which is great because it may not have been original, but it was fun at the time.
Was it difficult to come up with this list? You've done so many prolific remixes, and there are so many records out there. To narrow it down to 10, was that difficult for you, or did you know straight away, Phil?
What I've done today, Steve, is I've kind of concentrated on the PWL, mainly in-house mixes. The interesting thing within that, I think, Steve, that people tend not to bear in mind is it's actually stretched across quite a few different genres. You know, so for instance, if we were to play and talk about Dead or Alive, You Spin Me Around, an absolute high-energy gay club anthem.
Let's start with it then, because this is record number 1. Like you say, as soon as I heard this, I was transported to Heaven nightclub in London. This was the sound of Heaven nightclub. The moment this record starts, and you created this sound, how did you do it?
So they came with 4 tracks, and we had a fantastic, probably a couple of weeks doing those 4 tracks, but this was the standout track. And the real story behind this record is that last day when we'd pretty much finished all the recording. Stock and Aitken felt that the record didn't need any more on it. The band were saying, no, we still want to do this and we still want to try that. And then Pete Waterman turns up, as he often would, at 7 o'clock at night after he's been doing a lot of business and so on. And there's a fair bit of arguing going on in the studio, and he comes in, cuts right across it, says, right, everybody out, I'm going to mix this record tonight. Phil, you stay there in that seat, everybody go home. And that cooled everything down. A lot of people didn't want to go home. So obviously Spin Me Round was recorded as a 3 or 4 minute song, as you finally would hear the 7-inch, but we set out to do a 6 or 7 minute version. It took us all night. All night. And then the next day the band came in, and Stock and Aitken came back in, and Pete Burns was completely blown away. I mean, obviously Pete Waterman knew if we can blow Pete Burns away, full 12-inch, full blast on the studio speakers, and he was over the moon.
Let's play it. You introduce it. It is your mix. It's obviously You Spin Me Around. This is the what mix?
The Murder Mix.
The Murder Mix. Let's get into this.
Love Chris Evans. Love the 80s.
Virgin Radio 80s Plus.
So this is a real treat this week. Phil Harding, he remixed all the songs that we loved, that we danced to, that we pretty much bought on 12-inch records in the 80s, and he's my guest, and we're going for a double play of his own remixes this afternoon. Let's do it.
My 80s playlist.
Virgin Radio 80s Plus.
All right, so Phil Harding, let's get serious. Bananarama, Venus, the original extended mix. I put here on my list in massive capitals, the best version. Tell me about this, because this is absolutely legendary. I mean, this sound has gone around the world and back again, Phil, and it's thanks to you.
Yeah.
Tell me, how did you even begin to make a record as legendary as this one?
Well, Bananarama was a challenge for us because they were already successful. And if you look across the acts that came into PWL and the acts that Stock Aitken Waterman worked with, certainly in that kind of mid-80s period, on starting with fresh acts. But we had a good relationship, certainly Waterman did, with Pete Tong. And Pete Tong was running his own label at London Records. And he sent Bananarama over. Quite who chose to do a cover of Venus, an old 60s or 70s pop hit, I'm not sure. But the interesting part of the story is that there was no real direction of how do we cover this song, what do you want to do, girls? There seemed to be no real discussion. So
you just left to do it?
Well, I mean, obviously the girls came in and did their vocals and so on. And all the guitar you hear that starts it off, that's Matt Aitken. He's a great guitarist. And we set about doing basically a straight ahead pop record. You know, it didn't even have a 4 to the floor dance beat at that point.
Yeah.
And we were probably on the last day and we'd started mixing. And just down the road here, there's this wonderful pub, the Gladstone, around the back of the Borough Tube Station.
This was in the documentary, wasn't it? The Stock Aitken Waterman documentary.
Yes, you saw them in that pub.
Yes.
And we've just visited there, actually. You know, it used to be 10 o'clock at night, tools down, everybody around at the pub. For some reason, Matt Aitken and I had stayed in the studio when we were finishing this mix. So we didn't go to the pub. And certainly my memory was that when the pub kicked everyone out just after 11, Siobhan out of the band came in, put a head round the corner to listen to what we were doing, and finally said, actually, we didn't want it to sound like this, we wanted to sound like Dead or Alive.
Oh, okay.
To which Matt and I were sort of, okay, we can do that. Let's power up the drum machine. Come on, guys. And suddenly there was all this action, and what was a straight ahead boom boom pa boom boom type of beat. Suddenly, you know, we were into Four on the Floor. You know, the octave bass line from the Dead or Alive record.
It was the permission you needed.
The cowbells, the hand claps. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And it worked.
This record and the style and the sound that you created must have actually really influenced the whole clubbing scene in America, because they wouldn't have heard records like this, and then they started to produce records like this that then came over here.
Exactly.
So it was a first, wasn't it?
The real turning point was Mel and Kim, and the credit to that was Pete Tong.
Right, Pete again. Now this is amazing actually, because we're going to play Mel Kim now. So I first learned Pete Tong in about 1988. So you were in kind of cahoots with Pete, were you? And he was working as an A&R man, was he?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was his influence of that connection I talked about with London Records and Bananarama.
Yeah.
It kind of grew to, I mean, he must have been enthusiastic about this, that he would often turn up on a Friday evening, and he turned up one Friday, and I can't remember the exact records he pulled in. Let's say there were 3 or 4 of them, and it was Chicago House. And we already had a track in the bag from Mel Kim, which eventually got released, called System.
Yeah.
But it had gone to the factory, it was getting pressed. Pete Tong, he was so enthusiastic about these Chicago House records, first time we'd heard anything like it, and Waterman said, we've got to make a record like this. And within a week, we had Showing Out with lots of samples that I managed to...
I was going to say, this is a different kind of sound. This is almost like a next chapter from the likes of
This is us coming out of high energy and our flirtation with R&B into house.
Yeah. And how did you do that? What's different about this record than the others?
Well, that Chicago house sound was a combination of different bass lines and different types of percussion. There was something about it that it wasn't high energy, but it wasn't R&B soul. So there's things on there like there's like a brass stab, those sort of stabby things, which I managed to sample off of some of the other records.
Is that how you did it?
Yeah.
Wow.
But also, if you were to dissect the song itself, there's not really a standard verse and chorus. It's just a series of kind of hooks and things coming at you. You kind of get a verse, but
I think this was made for Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
All I think of is the neon signs and the cameras rolling around and stuff,
And they were great girls. They were fantastic to work with, and they really put that whole visual thing to it, and the dance. And Showing Out is a good example, and then Respectable.
Of course.
Great examples of taking a very underground club sound from America and commercialising it.
So what are we going to play? What mix is this?
This is Showing Out, the original extended mix.
just incredible hearing some of those original versions again. They're never ever played on the radio. Mel Kim showing out Freehold mix and Bananarama, the Hellfire mix of Venus. All thanks to the wonderful Phil Harding. He's joining me every day this week on Virgin Radio 80s Plus, picking out and playing his best remixes. It is time to speak to our very special guest this week on my 80s playlist. It's Phil Harding. If you bought a 12-inch record in the 80s, there's a very, very good chance that you would have danced to one of Phil's remixes.
My 80s playlist.
Virgin Radio 80s Plus.
Phil Harding is here. It's my 80s playlist. Now, Phil, let's get serious. This is the only mix of this next song. It's Pet Shop Boys song. What were they doing putting the other one on introspective? This is this is the one that I remember.
Yeah,
and I love. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so they're always on my mind. This was the one that specifically we did for clubs. Specifically, I've talked about house. I've talked about high energy, and there was also what was called the Miami sound, and that's what they wanted.
With an act like the Pet Shop Boys, let me shut this question because I've always wanted to ask you this. So they've recorded their song.
Yeah.
Do they send over the raw vocal?
Yeah, they send over.
You got the raw vocal, and then you build around the track. How does that work, Phil?
So they send over the whole multi-track, which is probably 48 tracks worth on analog, and we transfer what we want from that onto a new tape. Plus, we sample things, into our sampler and computers and so on. So they turned up to the studio, that's what I'm saying, and it must have been Neil. Oh, we don't really want this to be a house mix. Do you mind a different direction? You can imagine how we spent 3 days on this doing a house mix.
Yeah.
So after some discussion, we agree on something more like a Miami type sound, which, may not come across necessarily on the record. But the amusing thing is that we get to the middle 8 section of the mix.
Yeah.
And Neil turns around and says, actually, why don't we have one section of your house? like a middle 8 section.
Yeah.
And then he had the idea, you hear it in the middle of the record, of You're Always in My House.
Yes. Which is brilliant.
Which is Neil's idea.
Right.
He said, put up a mic for me.
I always wonder where that came from.
He said, put up a mic for me. I'll go out and say the word house, and then you guys cut it in. So it's always in my... And as we hit house, we hit the house groove instead of the Miami groove that the rest of the record is.
Random, legendary though, isn't it? And you predict where it's coming when you're listening to it, You know it's coming up.
Well, we thought it was weird at the time, but it's gone down very well in history.
Well, let's listen to it. I mean, this is the Phil Harding original extended mix. It's very special. You must be very proud of this.
I am, always on my mind, and I like to think that it helped them to get Christmas #1 that year.
7s love the 80s.
Virgin Radio 80s Plus.
This is a real treat. All this week, we are hearing the versions of the songs that Phil Harding, remixer producer, he made world famous. Over to Phil for today's pick now.
My 80s playlist.
Virgin Radio 80s Plus.
I want to ask you, as we go to Rick Astley, Phil, is there anyone that you never got the chance to remix, that you always wanted to remix?
Would love to have remixed Elton John. We did do, way back in the early days, and I can't even remember which track now, we had a go at doing an Elton John extended mix.
It wouldn't have sounded that weird, would it?
Well, it was still back in the high energy days. It was pre-house. And it never saw the light of day.
Let's talk about Rick Astley. Tell me about Rick. He was a special part of the stable. When Pete Waterman was in doing this show, he told us a story of he went to see Rick's band, and it was just out of luck that Rick was singing that night because he was supposed to be on the drums and knew that there was something special going on. And next thing, he's kind of like the T-boy, you know, and being paid. What do you remember about Rick? Do you know Rick?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, he was introduced to us at the studio.
He was a really young lad, wasn't he?
Yeah, young lad. He was on a youth scheme, YTS or something.
A youth training scheme, wasn't it?
You know, and Pete told us that. The only people that Pete told that he was going to be an artist were Mike Stock Aitken and the managing director, David Howes. And so, therefore, he was introduced to the rest of us in the studio as the next T-boy. And by that time, we had 2 or 3 studios, so there were quite a few assistants, you know. So, you know, it was no sugar and a bit of milk, please, Rick. And that's how it started.
It's interesting that out of all the artists in this Stock Aitken Waterman stable, I mentioned this to you before, I would say, personally, as a fan, Rick Astley and Kylie were probably the greatest vocals you could work with.
Yeah, I mean...
Would you agree?
Yeah, once Rick started singing, we were blown away.
Why have you picked this one, She Wants to Dance With Me?
I picked that because that's the first lead single off the second album. And after the huge run of hits off the first album, big expectancy of Rick coming into the studio and doing a second album. But he'd been writing a lot more songs, you know, and I think he'd said to Pete, I want to do more of my own songs, and I think I can write hit singles.
Yeah.
So the first track that was recorded with Stock Aitken Waterman, Rick didn't like. And in fact, there was a bit of a stormy day where he stormed out of the building, and we all thought, oh God, you know, is that the end of it with Rick? But Pete rightly hung in there. You know, he spoke to Rick. Rick said, look, why don't you let me go and record some of my own songs, you know, with Phil and Ian maybe down we had a different studio, and Rick had written She Wants to Dance With Me, you know, and he said, I want live guitars, bass, some different backing singers. We didn't go as far as live drums, but so we went down there, and Rick had written this song and co-produced it with myself and Ian, and with a few adjustments, like a different bass line and a fours on a kick. Pete Waterman was happy, and it became the first single for the second album, and Rick was back in the fold. That was the important thing. He was then went ahead and made a second album, which was great. So I've picked it out because it's one that a hit single that I produced.
To tell you what I've heard, she don't want no wild romance. When she's with me, she only wants to dance. She wants to dance with me. my baby oh so much, 'cause I love her, and I think she loves me, and that's the way it's got to be. When we're together, we never fight. We got better things to do tonight. She wants to dance with me, 'cause I hold her so tight next to me. She wants to dance with me, 'cause I let her be what she wants to be. She wants to dance.
Virgin Radio 80s Plus.
Phil Harding has been such an amazing guest this week on my 80s playlist, and I've held this conversation for today, his final day appearing. We've got to talk about Kylie.
My 80s playlist.
Virgin Radio 80s Plus.
Phil, come on, it's been so great hanging out with you this week. Thank you for coming in.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's like, you know, this is, if 14-year-old Steve could have seen him now, he'd be like, you know, just in amazement that I'm chatting to the guy who remixed all these. I used to spend all my pocket money on these songs. Wow. It's wonderful. Did you ever meet Kylie?
Oh, yes, of course, yeah.
Okay, tell me about Kylie.
No, having not met Donna, I mean, you know, artists that were coming and going a lot, like Kylie and Jason and Rick, you know, they were all part of the family and all part of the team.
Yeah.
You know, and they'd come to the Christmas parties. Rick would come down the pub. Jason would come down the pub. Don't think Kylie did. But...
was Kylie as lovely as I would have hoped, you know? She looked like her. I mean, Pete said that she was basket weaving the first time he saw her and thought that she was a schoolgirl from it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Pete relayed the famous story about keeping her waiting a whole week.
Yes.
Before they made I Should Be So Lucky. She's here to make a record with Mike and Matt, and they kept her waiting that whole week until finally she got famously into the studio on the Friday.
Yeah.
And so the dilemma, I think, for the boys on the Friday was, you know, what on earth are we gonna do? We've only got an afternoon to do it.
Yeah.
And we had this wonderful club promoter that, you know, was part of the company called Pit Stop, and I wasn't in the room, but the main story that goes out is that you know, one of the guys saying, you know, well, couldn't we give her something off the shelf, which really, you know, as I say, didn't exist.
No.
And Pit Stop said, well, she should be so lucky to get something off your shelf.
And that's how it started.
And ding. There's some different versions of that story, but that's
I love it.
that one's been confirmed.
That
one's been confirmed 3 times.
You worked on so many Kylie songs. Do you have a personal favourite remix of one of Kylie's songs?
It's the one we're going to play.
This
Step
one.
Back in Time.
Tell me about this.
Because it gave such an opportunity for myself and Ian Curnow to get really involved. I mean, we did end up producing one track with her, Celebration, which was one of the latter singles from that period. Pete came down to, because we had all these different studios, and he came down to myself and Ian and basically said that for this track and there was another track, we want to get Kylie back into the clubs. So that record gave us the opportunity to use a lot of samples that we wouldn't necessarily have dared use with someone else, but we presented it to Pete like that, and we went with it. And I think that it's got a real happy, as you say, sort of 70s club vibe about it, and
it just makes you want to move immediately.
And just the way Mike Stocks, he's the main lyric writer, the way he's kind of written it in a sort of retro disco, it just makes you want to get up and party and join in with it.
Yeah.
So that was really a fun record to do, because we were given a free hand to add on whatever we wanted without having to get someone else to approve it.
Just want to say, Phil, thank you so much for coming in this week. Thank you for the book as well.
Oh, pleasure.
This is my reading for the next couple of weeks. Amazing to meet you.
And you, Steve.
And, a joy to kind of meet the man behind all those pocket money. All that pocket money I spent on all those songs. So, Phil, thank you so much.
My pleasure, and thanks for playing the extended versions.
I want a funk, I want a funk, I want an F-F-U-F-U-N-K. I want a funk, I want a funk, I want an F-F-U-F-U-N-K. I want a funk, I want a funk, I want an F-F-U-F-U-N-K. I want a funk, I want a funk, I want an F-F-U-F-U-N-K. wanna funk. I wanna F-F-U-F-U-N-K. I wanna funk. I wanna funk. I wanna F-F-U-F-U-N-K. I wanna funk. I wanna funk. I wanna F-F-U-F-U-N-K. I wanna funk. I wanna funk. I wanna F-F-U-F-U-N-K. I wanna funk. I wanna funk. I wanna F-F-U-F-U-N-K.
Love Chris Evans. Love the 80s.
Virgin Radio 80s Plus.
So Kylie Minogue and Lonnie Gordon, another double play on our PWL day here on Virgin Radio 80s Plus. I am loving this. I could do a whole 4-hour show just full of Stock Aitken Waterman music, but I'm not sure how that will go down. Maybe I should suggest it